Corey Alexander was 42, quiet, and looked like a man life had passed by. He drove an old Toyota Highlander reheated gas station coffee every morning and wore a wrinkled navy suit into Denver District Court. Most people there believed Vanessa Whitmore Alexander had supported him for years. What they didn't know was that Corey had once walked away from a $4 million federal contract to raise her 3 children. Then Vanessa faced Judge Eleanor Whitaker and said coldly he never contributed anything. Corey slowly opened the folder in his lap. Before we continue, comment your country and local time below. And if you enjoy stories where quiet people let the truth do the talking, subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow's story gets even deeper. 9 years earlier, Corey Alexander sat alone inside a glass conference room on the 33rd floor of the Palmer Center in downtown Chicago, staring at a contract worth more money than he had ever imagined seeing attached to his own name. Outside the windows, Lake Michigan looked gray beneath November clouds. Inside the room, everything smelled expensive. Leather chairs, fresh coffee, polished walnut tables that reflected the city lights. The Summit Ridge Infrastructure Group logo sat printed across the top page in dark blue ink. $4 million. Federal Transportation Modernization Project. 5-year contract. Corey read the numbers again anyway. Not because he doubted them, because he had spent 15 years working toward this exact moment. At 42, he had built a reputation quietly. He was never flashy, never the loudest consultant in the room, but companies trusted him when projects collapsed. Rail systems, freight logistics, emergency rerouting after weather disasters. Corey fixed expensive problems without turning himself into the center of attention. That was why Summit Ridge wanted him. A vice president named Richard Bannon leaned back in his chair and smiled. "You'd oversee operations across 3 states," he said. "Chicago, St. Louis, Denver. We're prepared to move quickly if you are." Corey nodded once. On the table beside him sat his phone. 3 missed calls from Vanessa, 2 texts. "Call me ASAP." Then another one. "Please." Corey apologized and stepped out into the hallway. The carpet muted his footsteps. He answered immediately. Vanessa sounded exhausted. Not emotional, not dramatic. Worn down. "I'm at St. Joseph's," she said quietly. Corey stopped walking. "What happened?" Sophie couldn't breathe again. Corey closed his eyes for half a second. 6-year-old Sophie had been struggling with severe asthma for months. Emergency inhalers, nebulizer treatments, late-night coughing fits that left her terrified and shaking. "Is she okay?" They stabilized her. Vanessa inhaled slowly. But Caleb got suspended again today. Corey leaned against the wall beside the elevators. What did he do? Fight in the locker room. That bad he broke another kid's nose. Somewhere below, traffic horns echoed through downtown Chicago. Vanessa's voice lowered. "And Emma still won't talk to me." That part hurt differently. Emma Whitmore was 14 and angry at the world in the quietest possible way. Since Vanessa's divorce from her first husband, the girl had built walls around herself brick by brick. She skipped piano lessons, ate dinner in silence, stayed awake until 2 in the morning, pretending homework mattered more than sleep. Corey had spent almost 2 years trying not to push too hard, trying to become safe instead of important. Vanessa finally spoke again. "They offered me the executive position." Corey already knew. North Star Community Alliance had been pursuing Vanessa for months. The nonprofit was growing fast across Colorado. Big donors, public visibility, television interviews, political connections. Vanessa wanted it badly, not for money, for identity, for proof she had survived her divorce without collapsing. "That's good," Corey said. "It starts in January." Corey looked through the giant windows toward the frozen lake. And I can't do this alone anymore. Silence settled between them. He understood what she meant before she said it. The travel, the schools, Sophie's medical issues, Caleb's anger, Emma drifting further away every month. Vanessa's career would explode forward. Someone else would have to stay still. "You're asking me not to take it," Corey said carefully. "I'm asking for 1 year." Her voice cracked slightly at the end. 1 year until things stabilize. Corey said nothing. Downstairs, a train moved slowly through the city. Vanessa continued speaking softly, almost embarrassed now. "You're better with them than I am lately." Corey stared at the Summit Ridge folder in his hands. $4 million, 5 years, national recognition, the kind of contract that changed careers permanently. He imagined the version of his future that disappeared the second he walked away from it. The airports, the hotels, the industry conferences, the promotions afterward. Then another image replaced it. Sophie crying into an oxygen mask. Caleb getting expelled. Emma eating dinner alone upstairs. Corey had never wanted children of his own before meeting Vanessa. Not because he disliked kids. Life had simply moved too fast. But somewhere between school pickups and emergency room visits, something changed. He started memorizing their routines. Emma hated mustard. Caleb only talked honestly while staring out car windows. Sophie slept better if someone sat beside her bed until she closed her eyes completely. Those details attached themselves to him quietly, like roots. "I'll call you back," Corey finally said. He returned to the conference room 5 minutes later. Richard Bannon smiled immediately. So he said, "Sliding the contract forward, should we make this official?" Corey sat down slowly. The papers waited in front of him. Everything in the room suggested momentum, advancement, winning. He picked up the pen, then put it back down. Richard noticed the change instantly. "What's wrong?" Corey folded his hands together. "My family situation changed." Richard's smile faded slightly. "We can accommodate travel adjustments. It's more than travel." Richard studied him carefully now. "You're seriously reconsidering?" Corey nodded once. The vice president leaned forward. "Corey, do you understand how competitive this project is?" "Yes. You were our first choice." Corey looked at the contract one last time. Then he closed the folder. At that exact moment, he understood something difficult. Most sacrifices did not feel dramatic while they were happening. No music played, nobody applauded. Sometimes a life changed because a tired man closed a folder inside a quiet room. Richard exhaled slowly. "This is about the woman in Denver." Corey gave a small nod. "And her kids." The older man sat back in silence. Finally, he said, "You're making a very expensive decision." Corey almost smiled. Maybe. Or maybe he was choosing what kind of man he wanted to become when nobody was watching. An hour later, he sat alone in the hotel lobby finishing the rejection paperwork while snow drifted against the windows outside. A young couple laughed near the elevators. Some businessmen argued quietly into a Bluetooth headset. Normal life continued around him. Corey signed the final page. Then he placed the contract back into the envelope carefully like something fragile. He did not know it yet. 9 years later, the woman he sacrificed it for would stand inside a courtroom and claim he had never contributed anything at all. The first thing Corey Alexander learned was that children noticed consistency long before they offered trust. Not affection, not gratitude, consistency. 3 weeks after turning down the Summit Ridge contract, Corey stood in a freezing school pickup line outside Ridgeview Middle School, with a travel mug of burnt coffee in one hand and Sophie's pink inhaler in the other. Snow collected along the edges of the parking lot in gray piles. SUVs crawled forward, bumper to bumper, while exhausted parents stared at their phones. Corey kept checking the dashboard clock. 2:57 p.m. Emma walked out first. Headphones on, backpack hanging off one shoulder, eyes fixed on the pavement. She saw Corey waiting beside the Highlander and hesitated for half a second before climbing into the back seat without speaking. No hello, no smile, just silence. Corey accepted that. Then Caleb appeared, 11 years old, angry at everything. Hoodie pulled up despite school rules. He opened the passenger door aggressively. You're late. Corey glanced at the clock. 2:59. I've been here 20 minutes. Caleb slammed the door harder than necessary. You still should have parked closer. Emma stared out the window. Corey pulled away from the curb calmly. No argument. That became another thing he learned quickly. The children had spent years watching adults react emotionally. Their father disappearing after the divorce had turned every room into unstable ground. Raised voices, broken routines, promises that changed every week. Corey discovered that stability mattered more than speeches. So he stopped trying to win moments. Instead, he focused on patterns. Breakfast at 6:30, school lunches packed before sunrise, soccer schedules taped to the refrigerator, emergency asthma medication always stored in the second kitchen drawer. By February, he could navigate Sophie's breathing treatments half asleep in darkness. By March, he knew Emma only talked during car rides if music stayed low. By April, Caleb started leaving his basketball schedule on the counter instead of pretending Corey didn't exist. Small things. But families were built out of small things. Vanessa barely noticed the transition at first because her new position at North Star Community Alliance consumed everything around her. Meetings, donor dinners, weekend conferences in Aspen, public panels in Boulder. At night, she returned home exhausted but energized, at the same time speaking quickly about board members and fundraising goals, while Corey reheated leftovers for the kids. You wouldn't believe who was there tonight, she said one evening, while kicking off her heels near the kitchen island. Corey stood at the stove stirring tomato soup for Sophie. Who Mayor Whitaker? The Denver mayor. Vanessa smiled proudly. She remembered my name. Corey nodded. That's good. Sophie tugged on his sleeve. Can I have crackers too? Corey crouched beside her immediately. Saltines or Ritz Ritz? He grabbed the box without thinking. Vanessa kept talking while scrolling emails on her phone. We're getting attention statewide now. Corey listened carefully. He always did, but he also noticed something else. The farther Vanessa moved into her new world, the less she seemed to notice what held the old one together. She never saw the permission slips already signed, the laundry folded before sunrise, the parent-teacher meetings Corey attended alone, the emergency dentist appointment after Caleb cracked a tooth during practice. Those things disappeared because they were handled before they became disasters. That was Corey's specialty. Preventing collapse quietly. One Thursday afternoon, Ridgeview Middle School called during a snowstorm. Caleb had punched another student during gym class. Corey arrived 20 minutes later. The vice principal, Sandra Mendez, sat across from Caleb inside a cramped office decorated with anti-bullying posters. Caleb stared at the floor. He broke Marcus Hill's nose, Sandra said carefully. Corey nodded once. Why nobody knows, Caleb muttered. Sandra sighed. Marcus claims he made a joke. Corey looked toward Caleb. What kind of joke? Silence. Then Caleb spoke quietly. He said Mom replaced Dad with some loser who cooks pancakes. The room went still. Corey felt something heavy move through his chest. Not anger. Something sadder. Sandra shifted awkwardly. Caleb. But Corey raised a hand gently. It's okay. He looked at the boy again. Did you hit him before or after the second comment? Caleb frowned slightly. There was a second one. What was it? Caleb's jaw tightened. He said you stayed because you couldn't do anything else. Corey leaned back slowly in the chair. Outside the office window, snow covered the football field in white sheets. Finally, Corey asked the question carefully. Do you believe that Caleb looked confused? What, that I stayed because I had nowhere else to go? The boy said nothing for several seconds. Then quietly, no. It was the first honest answer Caleb had given him in months. Corey nodded once. Okay. No dramatic speech followed. No lecture. He signed the disciplinary forms and drove Caleb home through heavy traffic while snow hit the windshield in thick waves. Halfway there, Caleb suddenly spoke. You could have taken jobs somewhere else, right? Corey kept his eyes on the road. Yes. Why didn't you? The answer could have sounded heroic. Instead, Corey shrugged lightly. Somebody needed to stay. Caleb looked out the passenger window afterward, unusually quiet. That night, Vanessa came home after 9:30. She looked exhausted. Corey updated her about the suspension while washing dishes. Vanessa rubbed her forehead. I can't keep missing meetings for this. Corey nodded. I handled it. I know. She paused, then added absent-mindedly, I honestly don't know what we'd do without your flexibility. Flexibility. Corey almost smiled at the word, as if his entire life had simply bent slightly around hers. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. Emma slowly stopped eating dinner upstairs. Caleb began asking Corey for rides to early basketball practice. Sophie developed a habit of falling asleep beside him during movies, with her head against his shoulder. And everywhere outside the house, people formed the same assumption. Vanessa Whitmore Alexander was the engine of the family. Corey was just nearby. At charity events, people asked Vanessa about leadership and vision. They asked Corey whether he enjoyed having so much free time. At school, functions teachers thanked Vanessa for being such an involved mother, even when Corey attended every meeting alone. Once, during a Saturday soccer game, another parent laughed casually beside the bleachers. So what exactly does your husband do all day? Vanessa smiled politely. Corey watched her from 20 feet away while helping Sophie zip her winter coat. Vanessa answered casually. He helps keep things together. The other parent nodded, like she meant household chores. Not sacrifice, not years, not abandoned futures, just errands. Corey never corrected anybody, because part of him believed the work itself mattered more than recognition. Until slowly, almost invisibly, he began disappearing inside the role everyone assigned him. One rainy October night, he stood alone in the kitchen, finishing tomorrow's lunches while the rest of the house slept upstairs. Turkey sandwiches? Apple slices? Sophie hated crusts. Emma preferred grapes instead of chips. Caleb needed extra protein after practice. Corey moved automatically now, efficient, quiet. Outside rain tapped against the windows. His phone buzzed on the counter. An old colleague had sent a message. Heard Summit Ridge got federal renewal funding. They still talk about you sometimes. Corey stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he locked the phone without replying. Upstairs, Sophie coughed once in her sleep. Corey immediately set the knife down and reached for her inhaler before even thinking about it. That instinct told the truth more clearly than words ever could. He was no longer visiting this family. He belonged to it, even if nobody outside the house understood what that cost him. The first receipt Corey Alexander saved was not intentional. It came folded inside the pocket of his winter jacket after a late-night pharmacy run for Sophie's asthma medication. $186.42. Children's liquid steroid, emergency inhaler refill, pulse oximeter batteries. Corey almost threw the receipt away while unloading groceries onto the kitchen counter. Then Vanessa walked in carrying her laptop bag and speaking into a Bluetooth headset. Yes, tell the board we can secure another donor table, she said while kicking off her heels. I'll handle it tomorrow. She muted the call briefly and looked toward Corey. How much was the pharmacy? Almost $200. Vanessa sighed tiredly. I'll pay you back Friday. Corey nodded once. No rush. She returned to the phone call immediately and disappeared upstairs. Friday came and went. The reimbursement never happened. Corey did not mention it again. Not because the money did not matter, because he understood exhaustion. At least that was what he told himself then. A month later, Emma needed orthodontic work after years of avoiding treatment. The estimate from Cherry Creek Orthodontics came to nearly $6,000. Vanessa stared at the paperwork inside the office waiting room. I honestly don't know how we're supposed to cover this right now. Corey looked at the numbers calmly. I'll handle it. Vanessa exhaled in relief so quickly it almost sounded automatic. Thank you. No discussion followed. No negotiation. The payment came from Corey's investment account 3 days later. Then Caleb tore ligaments during basketball season. Physical therapy twice a week, another stack of bills. Then Sophie's specialist appointments increased after another severe asthma episode during winter. Medical deductibles, prescription adjustments, emergency monitoring equipment. Money kept leaving Corey's accounts quietly, steadily like water, through a slow crack nobody repaired because the house still looked stable from outside. And every time Vanessa promised the same thing. I'll reimburse you once this quarter settles down. I'll get you back after the fundraiser. Let me clear a few things first. Corey always answered the same way. It's fine. Eventually he stopped expecting repayment at all. Instead, he developed a habit. Scanning receipts, uploading invoices, saving confirmation emails, not from resentment, from organization. Corey organized stress the way other people organize closets. Medical bills went into blue folders, school expenses into green, mortgage documents into black. He labeled everything carefully on an external hard drive beside the desk in the basement office nobody else used anymore. One rainy afternoon, Maggie Keller stopped by the house unexpectedly carrying takeout containers from a Thai restaurant near downtown Denver. Maggie had known Corey since college. Sharp-minded, precise, one of the few attorneys in family law who spoke softly instead of theatrically. She found Corey sitting at the dining room table surrounded by paperwork while Sophie colored beside him. You look like an accountant preparing for war, Maggie said. Corey smiled faintly. Orthodontics, insurance disputes, school forms. Sophie held up a drawing proudly. It's a dragon. Maggie studied it seriously. That dragon owes taxes. Sophie laughed and ran upstairs. Maggie sat across from Corey and glanced at the organized stacks. You keep records for everything mostly. Good. Corey shrugged. It helps me think. Maggie opened her food container. Still, keep 'em. For what she gave him a long look, for life. Corey frowned slightly. You think Vanessa and I are heading toward divorce? I think people rewrite history when they're under pressure. That sentence stayed with him longer than he expected. Not because he distrusted Vanessa, because he had already started noticing small distortions appearing around the edges of conversations. At North Star events, Vanessa introduced him differently, depending on the audience. This is my husband, Corey. Or Corey handles things at home, or sometimes. Corey's in between opportunities right now. That last phrase bothered him more than he admitted. Not angry, just strange. As if years of labor became temporary emptiness because no corporate badge was attached to it. One evening, Corey arrived early to North Star's downtown office to pick Vanessa up for dinner. The receptionist smiled politely. You can wait in her office if you want. Corey nodded and stepped inside. Vanessa's office overlooked downtown Denver through floor-to-ceiling windows. Awards lined the shelves beside framed photographs from fundraising galas and charity events. Most included Vanessa, standing at podiums surrounded by donors. Only one picture included Corey. Even then, he stood partially cropped near the edge. Corey sat quietly in the leather chair while waiting. Then a document on Vanessa's desk caught his eye accidentally. Tax preparation paperwork. He was not snooping. The folder simply sat open. One line pulled his attention immediately. Dependent spouse. Corey stared at it. At first he assumed it was a mistake. Then he kept reading. Employment status unemployed. Primary household earner, Vanessa Whitmore Alexander. Corey leaned back slowly in the chair. The office suddenly felt colder. Not because of the tax designation itself, because it erased everything invisible. the school pickups, the hospital visits, the mortgage payments from his savings, the years. Vanessa walked in moments later carrying coffee. "Oh, good, you're here." She stopped after noticing the paperwork open. Corey looked up calmly. "You listed me as a dependent." Vanessa froze briefly, then relaxed. "Oh, that." Corey waited. "It's just tax language, Corey. You marked me unemployed. You don't technically have active income right now." The words landed harder than she intended. Corey studied her face carefully. No cruelty, no guilt either, just efficiency. Vanessa sat down and opened her laptop. "You know how this works?" Corey nodded slowly. Maybe that was the problem. He did know how things worked now. The person earning visible money received the visible credit. Everything else dissolved into assumption. Vanessa sighed while typing emails. "You're taking this personally." Corey almost answered immediately, then stopped, because something inside him had shifted quietly, not broken, reorganized. That night after everyone went to sleep, Corey carried his laptop into the basement office. Rain tapped softly against the small window near the ceiling. He created a new digital folder, Household Contributions. Inside it, he built categories carefully: medical, education, mortgage, transportation, emergency expenses, schedules. He uploaded bank transfers, scanned invoices, archived payment confirmations, not out of paranoia. Not yet. Part of him still believed none of this would ever matter. Still believed Vanessa was simply overwhelmed. Still believed love naturally caused people to overlook certain sacrifices. But another part of him, the same disciplined part that once managed infrastructure failures across multiple states, recognized a dangerous pattern. Systems collapsed slowly before they collapsed all at once. And reality became fragile when only one person kept records. Around midnight, Corey finished scanning the orthodontics invoice, $6,143, paid in full from his account. He saved the file. Then another, and another. Upstairs, Vanessa slept peacefully after another successful fundraising dinner. Emma studied for finals. Caleb snored with television light flickering across his bedroom walls. Sophie's nebulizer machine hummed softly through the hallway monitor beside Corey's desk. The house sounded safe, stable, normal. Corey leaned back in his chair and looked at the growing folder on the screen. For the first time in years, he wondered whether disappearing quietly inside a family came with a cost nobody noticed until it was too late. Then he closed the laptop. Tomorrow morning still required breakfast at 6:30. By the 7th year of their marriage, Vanessa Whitmore Alexander had become the face of North Star Community Alliance. Her photographs appeared in Denver lifestyle magazines, beside headlines about leadership and civic impact. Local news stations invited her onto morning panels to discuss affordable housing initiatives and youth outreach programs. At charity events, donors lined up to shake her hand before she even reached the ballroom. Corey watched all of it from the edges of rooms, never bitter, just increasingly invisible. The North Star Winter Gala took place in December at the Crawford Hotel inside Denver Union Station. Snow covered the streets outside, while luxury SUVs unloaded donors beneath glowing gold lights at the entrance. Inside the ballroom looked like another universe. Crystal chandeliers, white orchids, black tie waiters carrying champagne, a jazz quartet near the stage. Vanessa stood near the center of it all in a dark emerald gown that made cameras follow her naturally. She moved through conversations effortlessly, touching elbows lightly, remembering names, smiling at exactly the right moment. Corey arrived 2 hours earlier through the service entrance, carrying backup extension cords and a plastic bin full of emergency supplies, phone chargers, batteries, tape, pain relievers, extra dress socks for Caleb, Sophie's inhaler, things nobody remembered until something went wrong. Can you help us with the Projector One event coordinator asked immediately after spotting him. Corey nodded. 10 minutes later, he was kneeling behind the stage adjusting cables while donors filled the ballroom upstairs. An audio technician beside him glanced over. "You hotel staff," Corey shook his head. "No." The man waited for more explanation. None came. By 6:30, the ballroom had filled completely. Corey checked seating charts while balancing 3 separate problems at once. A florist delivery was missing centerpieces. Sophie's dress shoes were hurting her feet. Caleb had disappeared again after arguing with Emma near the valet entrance. Corey handled each issue quietly. He found spare floral arrangements in storage, located bandages for Sophie's heels, then walked outside into the freezing parking structure behind Union Station searching for Caleb. He found him sitting on the hood of the Highlander, with his tuxedo jacket thrown beside him. "You planning to freeze to death?" Corey asked calmly. Caleb shrugged. "Better than being in there." Corey leaned against the nearby concrete pillar. "What happened? Emma keeps acting like I embarrass her." Corey nodded once. "That sounds accurate for 16. Caleb smirked slightly despite himself. Traffic sounds echoed faintly through the garage. After a minute, Caleb asked quietly, "You ever hate these events?" Corey looked toward the glowing hotel windows above them. "Hate is a strong word. You know what I mean." Corey understood exactly. Inside those rooms, Vanessa belonged completely. Corey functioned like part of the infrastructure, useful when needed, ignored when stable. Still, he answered carefully. "Your mom worked hard for this." Caleb kicked lightly at a patch of snow. "So did you." Corey said nothing. That silence answered more honestly than words. Back inside, the gala officially began. Vanessa stepped onto the stage beneath warm lighting while applause filled the ballroom. Corey stood near the rear entrance beside catering staff holding a clipboard with vendor contact numbers. Vanessa spoke beautifully, confident, polished. She thanked donors, volunteers, board members, civic leaders, and strategic partners. She spoke about community resilience and support systems, about unseen labor and collective sacrifice. The crowd loved her. At one point, Sophie tugged Corey's sleeve while Vanessa continued speaking overhead through giant speakers. "She looks pretty." Corey glanced toward the stage. "She does?" Then Sophie asked innocently, "Why don't you ever go on stage with her?" Corey looked down at the little girl. "Because some questions children ask arrive too early and too accurately." Before he could answer, applause exploded through the ballroom again. Vanessa smiled beneath the spotlight. Corey helped Sophie straighten her bracelet. Near the end of the evening, a tall man in a charcoal tuxedo approached the rear service table where Corey was reorganizing event schedules. "Excuse me," the man said casually, handing him an empty champagne glass. "Can you point me toward the McAllen tasting station?" Corey looked up. Late 40s. Expensive watch. Perfect teeth. The kind of confidence built from never waiting in lines. Before Corey could respond, Vanessa appeared beside them. "Grant," she said warmly, "there you are." The man smiled immediately. "Vanessa, incredible event. Grant Holloway, private equity executive. One of Northstar's newest high-value donors." Vanessa turned toward Corey. "Corey, this is Grant Holloway." Grant extended his hand politely but distractedly. "Good work tonight," he said. "These events are chaos behind the scenes." Corey shook his hand once. "They usually are." Grant glanced briefly at Corey's rolled sleeves and event clipboard. "You with the hotel?" There it was. The assumption arrived so naturally it barely sounded insulting. Vanessa paused. 1 second? 2? Long enough for Corey to notice. Then she smiled lightly. "Corey helps keep things running." Grant nodded immediately, already turning attention back toward Vanessa. "Well, you've got a good team." They walked away together seconds later. Corey remained beside the service table holding the empty champagne glass Grant had left behind. Not angry, just aware. Awareness had become sharper over the years. He noticed how people categorize value instantly based on clothing, posture, introductions, titles. Vanessa in designer heels under ballroom lights. Corey carrying backup batteries near the kitchen entrance. One appeared important, the other appeared replaceable. Near 10:30, the event finally began winding down. Guests filtered toward valet stations while hotel staff dismantled decorations. Corey loaded boxes into carts beside the ballroom when he overheard Vanessa laughing softly nearby. Grant Holloway stood beside her near the bar. "You seriously pulled this entire thing off?" Grant asked. Vanessa smiled proudly. "With a lot of help." Grant glanced around. "And your husband? What does he do?" Corey kept stacking equipment without looking up. A pause followed. Then Vanessa answered casually, "Corey doesn't really work anymore." The sentence landed cleanly. No cruelty in her tone. That almost made it worse, because she sounded sincere. Grant nodded sympathetically. "Well, not everyone's built for high-pressure careers." Vanessa laughed quietly. Corey placed another equipment case onto the cart carefully. His hand stayed steady. That was the strange thing about emotional pain after enough years. Sometimes it stopped arriving dramatically. No explosion, no shouting, just a small internal shift, like a picture frame tilting slightly on a wall. Corey continued working another 20 minutes before finally stepping outside into the freezing Denver night. Snow drifted through Union Station lights. The city smelled like ice and diesel fuel. He stood alone beside the loading dock, rubbing warmth back into his hands. Inside, applause still echoed faintly from departing guests. A side door opened behind him. Emma stepped outside wrapped in her winter coat. She studied him quietly. "You okay, Corey?" Looked toward the snow-covered streets. "Why wouldn't I be?" Emma hesitated. Then softly I heard what Mom said. Corey slipped his gloves on slowly. "She didn't mean anything by it." Emma frowned immediately. "That's not true." Corey finally looked at her. For years, Emma had avoided emotional conversations completely. Now something in her expression looked older, more observant. "She shouldn't talk about you like that," Emma said quietly. Corey forced a small smile. "It's late. You should head inside before Sophie starts looking for you." Emma stayed beside him another moment anyway. Then she asked the question almost carefully. "Do you ever regret staying snowflakes collected?" along Corey's coat shoulders. He thought about the Summit Ridge contract, about Chicago, about everything his life might have become. Then he pictured Sophie asleep during asthma treatments, Caleb asking for rides to practice, Emma finally standing beside him now instead of across from him. Corey answered honestly, "No." But for the first time in years, the answer took effort. The foreclosure notice arrived on a Tuesday morning folded inside a plain white envelope between grocery coupons and a water bill. Corey Alexander opened it while standing barefoot in the kitchen before sunrise. Outside, Denver was still dark. Snow rested along the fences behind the house on Willow Creek Drive, untouched except for rabbit tracks crossing the yard. Corey read the notice once, then again. Past due mortgage balance. Final warning before lender escalation. He checked the date immediately. 3 missed payments. For several seconds, he simply stood there listening to the refrigerator hum quietly beside him. Upstairs, Sophie coughed once in her sleep. The coffee machine clicked softly behind him. Corey walked into the dining room carrying the envelope and opened his laptop. The mortgage account confirmed everything. Vanessa had missed payments while redirecting money toward North Star expansion travel and event obligations. Not intentionally reckless, just stretched too thin and too confident that future income would catch up before consequences arrived. Corey stared at the overdue balance, $43,000, enough to become dangerous, not enough to destroy them yet. At 7:15, Vanessa rushed downstairs, wearing heels and carrying 2 phones at once. "Can you take Sophie to the pediatric specialist today?" she asked, while searching through her purse. "I've got the Aurora donor breakfast and then a board lunch." Corey slid the foreclosure notice across the counter. Vanessa froze. For the first time in months, genuine panic crossed her face instantly. "What is this? We're 3 months behind. That can't be right." Corey stayed calm. "I checked the account." Vanessa grabbed the paperwork with shaking hands. No. I transferred money from the operating account last month." "You transferred part of it." She pressed fingers against her forehead. "Oh my God." Corey poured coffee quietly. Vanessa paced the kitchen now. "If this gets out right now," Corey noticed the wording immediately. "Not if we lose the house. If this gets out." Northstar's executive image depended heavily on stability and credibility. Vanessa had built herself into a public figure inside Denver nonprofit circles. Financial problems threatened more than comfort. They threatened perception. "How much time do we have?" Vanessa asked. "Not much." She looked at him finally. For a brief moment, the confident executive disappeared completely. She just looked tired. "I can fix it," she said quickly. "I just need another month." Corey already knew a month would not solve anything. The debt load had been growing quietly for years beneath the surface. School expenses, medical costs, travel, lifestyle inflation around Vanessa's expanding career. The house itself had become part of the image. 5 bedrooms, good district schools, landscaped yard, professional holiday photographs every December. From outside, it looked successful. Corey understood systems too well to ignore warning signs anymore. That afternoon, after dropping Sophie at school and driving Caleb to basketball practice, he sat alone inside First Bank's Cherry Creek branch, reviewing investment accounts he had not touched in years. The financial advisor looked surprised. "You're liquidating most of this." Corey nodded once. "These funds were performing very well long term, I know." The advisor hesitated. "You sure about this?" Corey glanced toward the snowy street outside the office window. "No. But stability sometimes required immediate decisions instead of perfect ones." Within 10 days, Corey transferred enough money to stop foreclosure proceedings entirely. Retirement investments, old consulting reserves, remaining Summit Ridge savings. Years of quiet financial discipline disappeared into the mortgage balance like water into dry concrete. Vanessa cried the night he confirmed the payments cleared, not dramatically. She simply sat at the kitchen island after midnight with mascara smeared beneath tired eyes. "I don't know what would happen without you," she whispered. Corey believed her. That was part of the tragedy, because Vanessa often spoke honestly in private moments, then slowly forgot those truths in public. 3 months later, the mortgage crisis became another invisible disaster nobody outside the house ever learned about. Life stabilized again, at least on paper. Corey spent spring renovating parts of the home himself instead of hiring contractors. He rebuilt the basement into a study space for Emma before college applications began, installed shelving units, painted walls soft gray, added recessed lighting after watching YouTube tutorials late at night. For Sophie, he built a reading nook beneath the staircase with cushions and small string lights because she loved fantasy novels and hated thunderstorms. For Caleb, he converted part of the garage into a basic training area with secondhand weights and repaired flooring. Corey worked quietly after everyone slept, power tools humming at midnight, sawdust covering his jeans, hands cracked from cold weather and paint thinner. Vanessa noticed improvements the way people noticed oxygen, only after imagining life without it. One Saturday afternoon, Emma came downstairs while Corey installed bookshelves in the basement. She stood silently watching him work for almost a minute. "You built all this yourself, Corey." Tightened another screw. "Mostly." Emma touched the fresh wood carefully. "You could have hired someone." Corey smiled faintly. Probably. She looked around the room again. The new desk, the soft lighting, the shelves measured perfectly against the wall. You really think through everything. Corey shrugged lightly. Planning prevents problems. Emma nodded slowly, then almost quietly. You're the only person in this house who notices things before they fall apart. The comment stayed with Corey long after she went upstairs. Weeks later, Caleb called from downtown Denver at nearly midnight after getting arrested outside a parking garage following a fight with another teenager. Vanessa was in Washington, D.C., attending a nonprofit leadership conference. Corey drove to juvenile intake immediately. The fluorescent waiting room smelled like burnt coffee and bleach. Caleb sat hunched in a plastic chair wearing a torn sweatshirt and dried blood near his lip. Corey approached calmly. You hurt? Caleb shook his head. They called Mom, yes. What did she say? Corey paused briefly. She's trying to get a flight back tomorrow. Caleb laughed bitterly under his breath. Of course. Corey signed paperwork quietly while the processing officer explained release conditions. No lectures followed, no disappointment speech. On the drive home through empty highways, Caleb stared out the passenger window. Finally he asked, You mad Corey kept both hands steady on the wheel. Did you hurt somebody badly? No. Then we'll deal with the rest tomorrow. Silence settled again. Then Caleb spoke more quietly. You always show up. Corey glanced at him briefly. That's the job. Caleb frowned slightly. You're not actually my dad, though. The words could have wounded him years earlier. Now, Corey answered honestly, No. Another silence. Then Caleb looked back toward the window. Still. Corey understood what the unfinished sentence meant. The next month, Vanessa hosted another North Star strategy dinner for donors and board members at the house. Caterers filled the kitchen. Luxury cars lined Willow Creek Drive. Corey spent most of the evening refilling drink trays and directing parking because the hired valet team arrived short-staffed. Near the staircase, he overheard Vanessa speaking to two board members while giving them a tour. And this Space One woman asked. Vanessa smiled proudly. I redesigned most of the house myself. Corey stood 10 feet away holding folded rental linens. Then another board member complimented the property. This neighborhood must have cost a fortune. Vanessa laughed softly. It's worth it. I worked very hard for this house. Corey lowered his eyes toward the linens in his hands. Worked very hard. The phrase itself was true. But incomplete truths often became the most dangerous kind. Later that night, after the guests finally left, Corey walked slowly through the silent house, turning off lights room by room, dining room, kitchen, hallway sconces. Outside snow began falling again across Willow Creek Drive. Corey paused near the front window, looking out toward the neighborhood he had quietly saved from disappearing. Nobody would ever know what it cost him financially. That part did not bother him anymore. What unsettled him was something else. Vanessa no longer sounded like someone forgetting his sacrifices. She sounded like someone rewriting ownership entirely. And Corey was beginning to understand how easily invisible work could become invisible history. Emma Whitmore turned 17 on a windy night in October. The dinner reservation was at Bistro Vendôme near Larimer Square, one of the few places in Denver Emma genuinely loved. Warm yellow lighting, brick walls, small tables close together, quiet enough to hear conversations without forcing them. Corey Alexander booked the reservation 3 months early, not because the restaurant was impossible to get into, because he planned things carefully now, always. He spent the afternoon wrapping Emma's gifts at the kitchen table while Sophie colored beside him, and Caleb pretended not to watch from the couch. The first gift was practical, a contribution to Emma's future college housing account. $12,000 transferred quietly from the last consulting reserve Corey still kept untouched. The second gift mattered more, a restored photo album. Corey had spent weeks recovering old photographs from damaged storage boxes in the basement. Emma at 8 years old missing her front teeth. Emma learning piano. Emma asleep beside Sophie during a thunderstorm years earlier. Pictures Vanessa rarely printed because she moved too quickly through life to stop and preserve it. Corey arranged every page himself. No captions, just moments. "You're doing too much," Caleb muttered from the couch. Corey smiled slightly without looking up. "That's usually how birthdays work." Caleb shook his head. "No, I mean for Emma specifically." Corey taped the final corner carefully. "She notices more than she says." Caleb stared at him for a second. "Yeah," he said quietly. "She does." At 6:15, the family arrived at Bistro Vendôme beneath cold autumn rain. The sidewalks glistened under streetlights, while couples hurried inside restaurants carrying umbrellas against the wind. Emma wore a dark blue sweater and silver earrings Sophie had helped pick out. Vanessa was late, again. Corey checked his phone once while the waiter poured water. No message yet. Emma noticed. "You can order," she said calmly. "I'm hungry." Corey nodded. They ordered appetizers without Vanessa. Caleb leaned back in his chair, scrolling sports highlights, while Sophie built towers out of sugar packets. For the first 20 minutes, dinner actually felt peaceful. Then the restaurant doors opened. Vanessa entered, laughing beside Grant Holloway. The temperature at the table changed immediately. Grant wore a charcoal overcoat and moved through the restaurant like he belonged inside every expensive room automatically. Vanessa kissed Emma quickly on the cheek. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." Emma forced a polite smile. "You're late." "I know, honey." "Grant and I got stuck at a donor reception downtown." Grant smiled smoothly while removing his coat. Traffic was brutal. Corey noticed Vanessa had not mentioned Grant would be joining them. Not accidental, intentional. The waiter awkwardly rearranged seating, while Grant sat beside Vanessa across from Corey. For several minutes, conversation stumbled along politely. Grant discussed real estate investments. Vanessa talked about upcoming North Star expansion plans. Sophie accidentally spilled Sprite near the edge of the table. Corey cleaned it immediately with napkins before it reached Emma's phone. Small reflexes, invisible ones. Then Grant glanced toward Corey. "So Vanessa tells me you're basically retired these days." Emma looked up immediately. Corey folded the wet napkins calmly. "Not exactly." Grant laughed lightly. "Man, if I had the option, I'd retire tomorrow." Vanessa smiled into her wine glass. Corey always preferred flexibility. The sentence landed softly, but Emma heard it. Corey could tell. "You mean he raised us?" Emma said suddenly. The table went quiet. Vanessa blinked once. Of course he helped. Emma frowned. "No. I mean, he actually raised us." Grant shifted uncomfortably and reached for his drink. Vanessa's smile tightened slightly. "Emma, nobody's arguing about that." But something had already changed. For years, Emma observed quietly from corners of rooms. She noticed patterns without announcing them, and lately the pattern had become impossible to ignore. Every story Vanessa told publicly placed herself at the center. Corey existed somewhere near the edges. The waiter arrived with entrees at exactly the wrong moment. Steak frites for Grant, salmon for Vanessa, mushroom ravioli for Emma. Corey thanked him automatically while passing Sophie her utensils. Vanessa exhaled slowly. "We are not turning a birthday dinner into family therapy. No one's doing that," Emma said. Vanessa looked toward Corey now. "Aren't you going to say something?" Corey cut carefully into his food before answering. "It's Emma's birthday," meaning not tonight. Vanessa leaned back, slightly irritated now. "That's exactly what I mean sometimes," she said. "You always disappear from conversations." Caleb looked up from his plate immediately. "What does that even mean?" Vanessa gestured lightly with her wine glass. "Your stepfather avoids conflict because he's had the luxury of not dealing with pressure professionally for years." The sentence sounded polished, prepared. Grant stayed silent. Emma stared at Vanessa in disbelief. Corey felt the table shifting beneath him in a way that had nothing to do with dinner anymore. Years earlier, comments like that would have hurt privately. Now they disturbed him differently, because they no longer sounded careless. They sounded rehearsed. "Mom," Emma said carefully, "that's not fair?" Vanessa gave a small laugh. "Oh, please." Corey had plenty of free time compared to most adults. Free time. Corey looked down briefly at the tablecloth. He remembered asthma attacks at 3 a.m, emergency school calls, mortgage negotiations, hospital waiting rooms. Caleb sitting silently beside him after juvenile intake. Emma crying quietly after panic attacks before exams. Free time. Sophie reached for Corey's hand beneath the table without speaking. A tiny gesture. Automatic. Vanessa noticed it. For 1 second, something sharp crossed her expression before disappearing again. Grant cleared his throat awkwardly. "So Emma thinking about colleges?" The conversation lurched forward artificially after that, but the warmth never returned. Emma barely touched her food. Caleb grew increasingly silent. Vanessa compensated by talking more loudly about North Star projects and upcoming partnerships. Corey listened without interruption. Halfway through dessert, Emma suddenly stood. "I need some air." Corey started rising immediately. "I'll go with you." "I'm fine," Emma said softly. But Corey followed her outside anyway. Cold wind swept through Larimer Square while traffic moved slowly beneath glowing string lights overhead. Emma crossed her arms tightly against the cold. "She does that all the time now." Corey leaned beside the brick wall near the entrance. "She's stressed." Emma shook her head immediately. "No, she rewrites things." Corey said nothing. Emma looked at him directly. "You gave up your career for us, didn't you?" The question arrived cleanly. No room left to soften it. Corey watched headlights move through rain across the street. "I made choices. That's not an answer." He smiled faintly. "It's the only one I've got." Emma looked frustrated now. "You always protect her." Maybe. Or maybe Corey had spent so many years reducing his own importance that defending himself no longer came naturally. Before he could answer, the restaurant door opened behind them. Grant stepped outside holding his phone. "I think Vanessa left this at the table," he said. He handed the device toward Corey absent-mindedly while adjusting his coat. "Can you bring it in?" Corey nodded. Grant walked toward the valet stand. The phone screen lit up automatically in Corey's hand. A message preview appeared before he could look away. From Vanessa. "We need to talk about timing before I file anything. He still thinks we're stable." Corey's entire body went still. Another message followed immediately. "The financial side has to be controlled carefully." Rain tapped softly against the phone screen. Emma noticed his expression instantly. "What happened?" Corey locked the screen calmly. Nothing in his face changed. Years of controlling reactions made that possible. But somewhere deep beneath the calm, something cold began settling into place. Not rage, recognition. Inside the restaurant, Vanessa laughed at something the waiter said while reaching automatically for the phone she believed was still safely hidden inside her purse. Corey stared through the window at her for one long second. Then he slipped the phone into his jacket pocket and walked back toward the restaurant doors. Corey Alexander returned Vanessa's phone before dessert plates were cleared. He did not open the messages. He did not scroll. He did not ask questions in front of Emma. He simply stepped back into Bistro Vendôme, walked to the table and placed the phone beside Vanessa's wine glass. "You left this," he said. Vanessa looked up too quickly. For half a second her hand froze above the table. Then she smiled. "Oh, thank you." Corey sat down across from her. Grant Holloway was still outside near the valet stand. Caleb was pretending to watch a basketball clip on his phone. Sophie had vanilla ice cream melting in front of her. Emma watched Corey with the quiet alertness of someone who had seen enough to know something had changed. Vanessa slipped the phone into her purse. Dinner continued. Not normally, but technically. Corey cut Sophie's remaining chicken into smaller pieces. He asked Caleb about practice the next morning. He thanked the waiter for bringing Emma a birthday candle, even though nobody at the table sang with much energy. His hands remained steady. That was what unsettled him most. He had expected betrayal to feel hot. Instead, it felt cold and precise, like a door locking somewhere deep inside a building. On the drive home, Vanessa spoke about nothing important: Grant's donation prospects, a board retreat, the restaurant service. Corey responded when necessary. Emma sat behind him in silence. Caleb leaned against the window. Sophie fell asleep with her cheek pressed against her coat. At home, Corey carried Sophie upstairs and set her gently in bed. He placed her inhaler on the nightstand, checked the humidifier, and pulled the blanket to her shoulders. Routine kept him from shaking. Downstairs, Vanessa stood at the kitchen island scrolling her phone. "We need to talk about tonight," she said. Corey rinsed Sophie's cup in the sink. "About Emma. About you letting her speak to me that way." The faucet ran softly. Corey turned it off. She asked questions. She was disrespectful. She was hurt. Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. "You always do this." Corey dried his hands with a towel. "Do what make me the villain when I'm the only one carrying public pressure for this family." Corey looked at her then, not sharply, just fully. The room went quiet. Vanessa looked away first. "I'm tired," she said. "Forget it." She went upstairs without another word. Corey stayed in the kitchen until her footsteps faded above him. Then he walked downstairs to the basement office and closed the door. The room smelled faintly of sawdust from the shelves he had built months earlier. A desk lamp cast a warm circle of light over the old laptop, the scanner, the external drive, and 3 labeled boxes of household documents. Corey sat down slowly. For several minutes he did nothing. Then he opened the folder named Household Contributions: medical, education, mortgage, transportation, emergency expenses, schedules. The structure comforted him. Facts did not shift depending on mood. Receipts did not become defensive. Bank statements did not forget. Corey opened another box, one he had avoided for years: Summit Ridge. Inside sat the envelope from Chicago, still crisp at the edges. He removed the old contract packet and placed it on the desk. $4 million. Federal Transportation Modernization. 5 years. His name printed on page 7 under proposed lead consultant. For years, he had not looked at it because the document felt like a ghost. Now it felt like evidence. He did not like that. At 12:18 a.m., Corey called Maggie Keller. She answered on the 4th ring, voice rough with sleep. "Someone better be dead." "No." A pause. "Corey, I need legal advice." That woke her up. "What happened?" Corey looked at the Summit Ridge packet beneath his hand. "I saw part of a message on Vanessa's phone tonight. I didn't open anything. It lit up while I was holding it." "What did it say?" He repeated the words. "Exactly. We need to talk about timing before I file anything. He still thinks we're stable. The financial side has to be controlled carefully." Maggie went silent, not surprised. That told Corey more than he wanted to know. Finally, she said, "Do not confront her. I wasn't planning to." "Good. Do not accuse her. Do not threaten her. Do not move money suddenly unless we discuss it first. Do not send emotional texts." Corey listened. Maggie continued sharper now. "You need to document everything. Quietly, thoroughly, legally." Corey looked around the office. "I already have some records. How much years?" Another pause. Then Maggie said softly, "Of course you do." Corey almost smiled, but it did not reach his face. "I kept them for organization, I know. Now you keep them for protection." The word protection settled heavily between them. Maggie asked questions for nearly 40 minutes. Mortgage payments, school expenses. medical responsibilities, who attended appointments, who communicated with teachers, who signed emergency forms, who paid household costs, whether the home title was joint, whether Vanessa had separate accounts, whether he had proof of the Summit Ridge opportunity. Corey answered each one calmly, not because he felt calm, because details gave his mind rails to run on. At the end, Maggie said, "Listen carefully. If she files first, she may try to establish a narrative before you respond. What narrative? That you were financially dependent, that you made no meaningful contribution, that she supported you while you stayed comfortable." Corey looked at the old contract again. She knows that isn't true. Truth and courtroom truth are not the same thing until evidence connects them. He wrote that down. Maggie's voice softened. And Corey, yes, she may not be the person you keep protecting in your head. He did not answer, because some sentences were too accurate to respond to immediately. After the call ended, Corey began working. He created a second encrypted drive, then a third backup. He exported calendar records going back 9 years, school pickup schedules, parent-teacher conferences, asthma specialist appointments, basketball practices, emergency room visits. He downloaded bank statements showing tuition deposits, therapy payments, mortgage transfers, car repairs, orthodontic bills, grocery receipts, insurance payments. He found emails from teachers addressed primarily to him. Mr. Alexander Caleb had another incident today. Mr. Alexander, Sophie's inhaler form needs updating. Corey, Emma asked if you could attend the senior planning meeting. He saved everything. By 2:40 a.m., he located the rejection letter from Summit Ridge Infrastructure Group. The original email subject line remained intact. Final contract decision, Alexander Consulting. He opened it slowly. Dear Mr. Alexander, we regret your decision to decline the proposed engagement. The rest blurred slightly before he blinked once and refocused. He saved the email as a PDF, then printed a copy. The printer hummed softly in the basement, while the house slept above him. Each page slid out warm into the tray. Corey stacked them neatly. No emotion, no dramatic music, just paper. At 3:15 a.m., he walked upstairs to check the house. Emma's bedroom door was cracked open. Light still glowed faintly from inside. He knocked once. "You awake?" "Yeah." Emma sat cross-legged on her bed with the restored photo album open in front of her. Her eyes were red. Corey stayed in the doorway. "You okay?" She looked down at the pictures. "I didn't know you kept these." He nodded. "I thought you might want them someday." Emma turned another page slowly. A photograph of her at 9 years old sat beneath plastic film. She was asleep on the couch, head resting against Corey's arm, while a thunderstorm blurred the window behind them. "You were there for everything," she said quietly. Corey did not step inside. He knew the moment needed space. "I tried to be." Emma wiped her cheek quickly. "Is Mom leaving you?" Corey inhaled slowly. He would not lie. He also would not drag her into adult warfare before it reached her. "I don't know yet." Emma looked up. "But something's happening." "Yes." She closed the album carefully. "Don't let her say you didn't matter." The words hit him harder than anything Vanessa had said at dinner. Corey gripped the doorframe lightly. "I won't." He returned downstairs after Emma turned off her light. By then the sky outside the basement window had begun turning pale gray. Morning was close. The house would wake soon. Breakfast, school, work, the same routines. But Corey understood the system had already changed. For 9 years he had documented life because he believed order kept families steady. Now those records were becoming something else, a map through whatever Vanessa had already planned. He placed the Summit Ridge contract into a fresh folder, then wrote one word on the label: evidence. Vanessa Whitmore Alexander filed for divorce on a Thursday morning in March. Corey Alexander learned about it while sitting in the pickup line outside Sophie's elementary school with a box of grocery store cupcakes balanced carefully on the passenger seat. Vanilla frosting, blue sprinkles. Sophie's class was celebrating Reading Week, and Corey had volunteered to bring snacks 3 days earlier. Snow melted slowly along the sidewalks beneath weak spring sunlight. Parents sat inside idling SUVs, staring at phones while children spilled across playground equipment behind the school fence. Corey checked the dashboard clock. 2:41 p.m. Then his phone vibrated. Unknown number. He answered automatically. Mr. Alexander, yes. This is Denise Harper with Denver County Civil Processing. I'm confirming receipt of legal service documentation delivered to your residence this morning. Corey stared through the windshield. For a moment, the sounds around him dulled slightly. Children laughing, car engines, crosswalk whistles, all distant. What documentation, he asked quietly. A pause. Petition for dissolution of marriage filed by Vanessa Whitmore Alexander. Corey looked down at the cupcakes beside him. Blue frosting tilted slightly where the box had shifted during traffic. He thanked the woman calmly and ended the call. Then he sat motionless for nearly 30 seconds. No anger, no panic. Just the strange feeling of arriving at a place internally before your body catches up. Part of him had already known. The messages, the language changes, the distance. Still hearing it formally turned assumption into structure. Corey picked up the cupcakes before the frosting collapsed and carried them toward the school entrance, exactly when the bell rang. Because Sophie still needed cupcakes. That fact mattered to him more than the legal filing for the next 40 minutes. Inside the classroom, construction paper decorations covered the walls beside reading charts and hand-drawn dragons. Sophie spotted him immediately and ran forward. You brought the blue ones. Corey smiled faintly. I remembered. Mrs. Patterson, Sophie's teacher, thanked him warmly. You always save these classroom events. Corey nodded politely while setting cupcakes onto a side table. Always. The words stayed with him, always showed up, always remembered, always handled things before they became emergencies. And now, somewhere inside downtown Denver attorneys were preparing documents describing him as someone who contributed nothing. After the classroom celebration ended, Corey drove home slowly. The envelope waited on the kitchen island exactly where the process server had left it. White, official, neatly organized. Vanessa was not home yet. Of course not. Corey removed his coat carefully before opening the packet. Petition for dissolution of marriage. He read every page once without expression, then again more slowly. The language felt clinical. Petitioner has served as primary financial provider for the household. Respondent has remained largely unemployed throughout the marriage. Respondent contributed minimally to marital asset growth. Respondent demonstrates limited independent earning activity. Corey sat down at the kitchen table. The late afternoon sunlight stretched across hardwood floors while the refrigerator hummed softly nearby. Minimal contribution. The phrase repeated in his head quietly. He thought about Sophie, asleep against his shoulder during breathing treatments. Emma's panic attacks before college entrance exams. Caleb sitting silent in juvenile intake. Mortgage transfers, medical bills, the Summit Ridge contract. 9 years, minimal contribution. Corey closed the packet carefully. Then he opened the refrigerator, checked whether there was enough milk for tomorrow morning, and added another gallon to the grocery list. Routine kept him steady. At 6:30, Vanessa finally came home. She entered carrying a leather tote bag and immediately noticed the envelope open on the table. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Then Vanessa exhaled. I was going to tell you tonight. Corey remained seated. When after Sophie went to bed, Corey nodded once. The calmness unsettled Vanessa more than anger would have. You're not saying anything. What should I say? Vanessa placed her bag on the counter. This isn't working anymore. Corey looked at her carefully. The strange part was that she probably believed that sentence completely, not maliciously, simply through years of slowly reorganizing reality around herself. "When did you decide?" Corey asked. Vanessa crossed her arms. "I've been unhappy for a long time." "That's not what I asked." Her jaw tightened slightly. "A few months." Corey almost corrected her, because the messages suggested longer, but he did not. Not yet. Vanessa moved closer to the table. "This doesn't have to become ugly." Corey looked down briefly at the paperwork again. Minimal contribution, dependent spouse, limited earning activity. The ugliness had already arrived. "You listed me as financially non-contributing." Vanessa sighed impatiently. "That's legal framing, Corey." There it was again. The same phrase as before. Legal framing. Tax language. Professional positioning. As if words stopped mattering once placed inside systems powerful enough to formalize them. "You know what I gave up for this family," Corey said quietly. Vanessa looked away first. "You chose that." The sentence landed harder than shouting could have, because technically she was right. He had chosen every hospital visit, every pickup line, every mortgage transfer, every abandoned opportunity. The choice had been real. So had the cost. Upstairs, Sophie's footsteps crossed the hallway suddenly. Both adults fell silent instantly. A moment later, Sophie appeared at the staircase. "Are we ordering pizza?" Vanessa forced a smile immediately. "Sure, sweetheart." Sophie grinned sleepily and disappeared upstairs again. The performance resumed effortlessly. Corey noticed that too. After dinner, Vanessa locked herself inside the home office for nearly 2 hours, taking calls behind closed doors. Corey cleaned the kitchen alone. At 9:15, Caleb entered quietly, wearing gym shorts and headphones around his neck. He glanced toward the office. She filed. Corey looked up. "You heard this house has paper-thin walls." Corey dried another plate slowly. Caleb leaned against the counter. "So what happens now?" Corey considered the question carefully. The honest answer was complicated. War would happen now. Not loud war, paper war, narrative war, a battle over memory, contribution value, and ownership. But Caleb was 18, still young enough to deserve some protection from that reality. "We handle it," Corey said simply. Caleb stared at him for a long moment. Then quietly, "She's wrong, you know." Corey frowned slightly. "About what?" "You." The word almost caught him off guard. Caleb shoved his hands into his pockets awkwardly. "I remember stuff." Corey said nothing. Caleb continued looking toward the office door. "You were there more than anybody." Something tightened inside Corey's chest unexpectedly, because Caleb almost never spoke emotionally, not directly. Then the boy added softly, "You're basically my dad." Silence filled the kitchen. Corey looked away briefly toward the sink. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. After nearly a decade of school pickups, fights, hospital visits, and quiet consistency, the sentence arrived casually beside a drying rack full of dishes. Not during a speech, not during some cinematic moment, just truth appearing when nobody prepared for it. Caleb cleared his throat awkwardly. "Anyway, I'm going to shower." He started walking away. "Caleb." The teenager stopped. Corey's voice stayed steady despite the pressure building beneath it. "Thank you." Caleb shrugged without turning around, then disappeared upstairs. Later that night, Corey carried several storage boxes into the basement office. He worked methodically. Marriage records, bank transfers, medical invoices, mortgage statements, insurance documents, archived calendars, everything organized by year. Maggie Keller arrived at 10:30 carrying coffee and legal pads. She studied the growing stacks silently. She filed aggressively, Maggie said, after reading the petition. Corey nodded once. "She's establishing financial narrative early." Maggie flipped another page. "She's also asking for favorable property distribution. and trying to frame your role as optional domestic support instead of primary family management. Corey leaned back in the chair. She believes it? Maggie looked at him carefully. I think she's believed her own public story for a long time. That answer hurt because it sounded true. Maggie set the paperwork down. Good news? Corey almost laughed at the phrase. You documented everything. She tapped the folders lightly. Most people in your position have memories. You have evidence. Outside rain began tapping softly against the basement window. Corey looked toward the stacks of records surrounding the desk. 9 years compressed into binders and scanned files. Not revenge, not obsession. Just proof that invisible work had existed even when nobody applauded it. Maggie opened her notebook. Okay, she said calmly. Now we start preparing for court. Discovery began 3 weeks later. Corey Alexander learned quickly that divorce litigation did not resemble emotional arguments between two people. It resembled accounting. Every memory had to become documentation. Every sacrifice had to survive scrutiny. Every claim needed timestamps, signatures, and records attached to it like steel reinforcement inside concrete. Maggie Keller transformed the basement office into a war room. Color-coded binders covered the long folding table Corey usually used for household repair projects, blue for financial records, green for education, red for medical, black for property and mortgage documents, yellow for communication logs. Maggie stood over the table one Saturday morning wearing reading glasses and holding a yellow highlighter between her teeth. You know what your biggest advantage is, she asked. Corey sat across from her organizing scanned bank statements. I'm guessing you're about to tell me. You never stopped acting responsibly even after being ignored. She pointed toward the stacks. Most people become emotional halfway through a marriage like this. They stop documenting, stop planning, stop thinking clearly. Corey looked down at another spreadsheet. I didn't think I was documenting a divorce. No, Maggie said quietly. You were documenting reality. That distinction mattered. Vanessa's attorney, Randall Pierce, built his strategy aggressively from the beginning. The filings portrayed Vanessa as the sole financial engine of the household, while Corey existed as an underemployed dependent spouse with vague domestic involvement. The language was polished, careful, strategic. Corey read one section 3 separate times late one night. Respondent voluntarily withdrew from meaningful professional advancement opportunities during the marriage. Voluntarily. As if sacrifice became laziness once enough years passed. Maggie requested everything. North Star Board communications, financial disclosures, grant applications, archived fundraising materials, internal reimbursement records, travel expenditures, household contribution claims. Randall Pierce objected repeatedly. Maggie ignored him. People hiding clean information don't fight this hard over discovery, she told Corey. Meanwhile, Corey continued daily life almost normally. That part unsettled him. The marriage had collapsed formally, yet routine still survived around the edges. Sophie still needed rides to school. Emma still stressed over college acceptance deadlines. Caleb still left protein shake bottles in the sink despite repeated warnings. Corey still woke before sunrise automatically. One Tuesday afternoon, Sophie forgot her inhaler during a field trip day. The school called Corey first. Of course they did. He drove across Denver traffic with the inhaler resting in the passenger seat while listening to Maggie through Bluetooth. We received partial North Star disclosure, she said. Anything useful? Very. Corey merged onto Spear Boulevard carefully. Maggie continued. Vanessa repeatedly described herself publicly as the sole provider, but internally, different story. Corey waited. She referenced you as primary household stabilizer in at least 2 donor reports. He tightened his grip slightly on the steering wheel. Primary household stabilizer. Interesting how truth changed depending on audience. What else? There's more. A lot more. At the elementary school entrance, Sophie ran toward the Highlander holding her field trip permission packet. "You saved me," she said breathlessly after grabbing the inhaler. Corey smiled faintly. That's usually the goal. Sophie hugged him quickly before running back toward the buses. Simple, automatic. The kind of moment courts rarely measured correctly. That night, Maggie arrived carrying another banker's box full of copied materials. She spread several documents across the basement table. "Look at this." Corey adjusted his glasses. North Star grant proposal, 3 years earlier. A paragraph halfway down the page caught his attention immediately. Vanessa Whitmore Alexander has maintained executive leadership capacity through strong household support provided by her husband, Corey Alexander, who serves as primary caregiver and logistical anchor for the family unit. Corey read the sentence twice, then again. Maggie watched him carefully. She knew Corey said quietly. She documented it herself. Another file followed, then another. Conference biographies mentioning Corey's role in supporting Vanessa's executive work. Family-oriented donor campaign language, praising the stable partnership behind North Star leadership. Photographs of Corey and the children used in fundraising materials. Different audience, different narrative. The contradictions were beginning to form visible cracks. Still, Maggie stayed cautious. This helps credibility issues, she said, but the major issue remains financial contribution. Corey nodded. That part mattered most legally. Visible money carried weight. Invisible labor required translation. Fortunately, Corey had records, years of them, mortgage transfers, medical invoices, school tuition deposits, vehicle repairs, insurance payments. He had even maintained shared calendar exports showing thousands of childcare activities tied directly to him. Dentist appointments, parent-teacher conferences, emergency pickups, therapy sessions, Caleb's disciplinary meetings, Sophie's asthma treatments, Emma's college counseling appointments. An economic consultant named Dr. Helen Mercer reviewed the records over several days. She specialized in quantifying unpaid domestic labor during high-asset divorces. On Friday afternoon, she sat inside Maggie's office, flipping through spreadsheets with increasing disbelief. You maintain this level of caregiving while simultaneously subsidizing household costs. Corey shrugged slightly. We needed stability. Dr. Mercer adjusted her glasses. Mr. Alexander, your unpaid labor replacement value alone is substantial. Corey almost laughed at the phrase, replacement value, as if his life could be converted neatly into hourly service rates. But that was how courts function. Translate humanity into measurable categories. Dr. Mercer continued calmly. Child care management, transportation coordination, medical oversight, household operations, property maintenance, educational support. She tapped the papers lightly. And that's before accounting for career opportunity loss. Maggie glanced toward Corey. The Summit Ridge contract. Dr. Mercer nodded. If verified, it changes the entire economic narrative. That became the next objective. Verification. Corey still had the original documents and email chain, but Maggie wanted external confirmation strong enough to survive court scrutiny. So she contacted Summit Ridge Infrastructure Group directly. 3 days later, Corey sat alone in the kitchen while rain hammered softly against the windows. Vanessa was attending another board retreat in Boulder. Emma studied upstairs. Caleb worked late at the gym. Sophie watched cartoons beneath a blanket fort in the living room. The house felt strangely peaceful, considering it was being dismantled legally, piece by piece. Corey's phone buzzed. Maggie. He answered immediately. You sitting down? Yes. A pause. We got it. Corey waited. Maggie sounded almost impressed. Summit Ridge confirmed everything. Corey closed his eyes briefly. They provided archived correspondence. You were final stage selected lead consultant for the Midwest Transportation Modernization Project. Rain continued tapping against the glass. Maggie's voice lowered slightly. Estimated compensation exceeded $4 million over 5 years. Corey looked toward the dark backyard. 9 years earlier, he had walked away from that future quietly enough that almost nobody remembered it existed. Now, it was becoming evidence. They also confirmed why you declined, Maggie added. Corey frowned slightly. What do you mean? You mentioned family obligations in writing. Corey leaned back slowly in the chair. Of course he had. At the time, honesty felt normal. Now it felt devastatingly useful. Maggie continued. Corey listened carefully. This case is changing. How? Because Vanessa's legal argument depends on portraying you as someone who chose inactivity. She paused. A documented $4 million sacrifice destroys that narrative. Upstairs, footsteps crossed the hallway. Emma appeared at the kitchen entrance carrying textbooks against her chest. You okay? She asked softly. Corey looked at her for a moment before answering. Yeah. Emma studied his face carefully. You sure? Corey nodded once. Because strangely, for the first time since the divorce filing, he actually was. Not emotionally. Emotionally, he still felt exhausted. But something else had stabilized. Truth was no longer abstract. It had structure now. Documents, records, timelines, proof. Maggie spoke again through the phone. There's one more thing. What we found overlap between Grant Holloway and North Star funding allocations. Corey frowned. What kind of overlap? Enough that Randall Pierce is suddenly trying to limit disclosure requests. Interesting. Very interesting. Corey stared out toward the rain-dark backyard, while Sophie laughed faintly from the living room. Somewhere between mortgage payments, asthma attacks, school suspensions, and abandoned contracts he had spent years becoming invisible. Now the records were reversing that process line by line. Maggie's voice sharpened slightly. Court hearing is in 4 weeks. Corey looked down at the thick binders spread across the kitchen table. Every sacrifice preserved carefully in ink. Then we'll be ready, he said quietly. And for the first time since Vanessa filed, Corey believed it completely. The hearing took place on a gray Monday morning inside Denver District Court. Corey Alexander arrived 30 minutes early carrying 2 banker's boxes and a black leather folder worn soft at the corners from years of use. Outside, cold rain washed across courthouse steps, while attorneys hurried through security checkpoints holding umbrellas and coffee cups. Inside, fluorescent lights flattened everything into the same pale shade of exhaustion. Corey wore the same navy suit from the first hearing. Pressed this time, still modest. He sat beside Maggie Keller near courtroom 4B while clerks moved files between offices and distant voices echoed through the hallway. You sleep at all? Maggie asked quietly. Some. That's not an answer. Corey almost smiled. Neither of them looked toward Vanessa when she arrived, but everyone else did. Vanessa Whitmore Alexander entered the hallway with Randall Pierce beside her, wearing a cream-colored tailored blazer and carrying herself with the same polished composure she used during donor galas and televised interviews. Controlled. Professional. Grant Holloway was not with her. Interesting. Vanessa noticed Corey immediately. For a moment her expression softened almost imperceptibly. Then the courtroom doors opened, and the performance resumed. Judge Eleanor Whitaker entered precisely at 9 o'clock, mid-60s, sharp-eyed, minimal patience for theatrics. Corey recognized her name immediately from Vanessa's old stories. Years earlier, before becoming mayor, Eleanor Whitaker had built a reputation in Denver family court for valuing documentation over emotional presentation. That mattered. The clerk called the case, Whitmore Alexander versus Alexander. Corey stood calmly beside Maggie while Vanessa and Randall moved to the opposite table. The courtroom smelled faintly of paper coffee and old carpet. Judge Whitaker adjusted her glasses. Counselors, we are here regarding temporary financial determinations, property considerations, and contribution disputes. Let's proceed efficiently. Randall Pierce stood first. Everything about him sounded practiced. Measured pauses. Confident pacing. Controlled concern. Your Honor, he began, my client has spent nearly a decade serving as the primary financial provider for this household, while Mr. Alexander voluntarily disengaged from meaningful professional employment. Corey remained still. Randall continued. Mrs. Whitmore Alexander supported the family financially, socially, and professionally, while respondent benefited from the lifestyle her career provided. Benefit. Interesting word. Corey looked toward the judge instead of Vanessa. Randall gestured toward several summary exhibits. The evidence will show minimal independent income production from respondent and limited direct contribution toward long-term asset growth. Maggie wrote something on her legal pad without reacting. Judge Whitaker looked toward Vanessa. Mrs. Whitmore, Alexander, is that your position? Vanessa sat upright immediately. Yes, Your Honor. Her voice sounded calm. Public voice. The same one used at fundraising dinners. I carried the financial and professional responsibilities for our household for years. Corey noticed she avoided looking at him directly. Judge Whitaker nodded once, and Mr. Alexander Maggie stood slowly. Your Honor, opposing counsel has built an argument around visibility instead of substance. She opened the first binder carefully. We intend to demonstrate that Mr. Alexander provided extraordinary domestic, logistical, financial, and parental contributions throughout the marriage, many of which directly enabled petitioner's career advancement. Randall immediately objected. Counsel is editorializing. Judge Whitaker waved him down without interest. I'll decide what's editorializing, Maggie continued calmly. Mr. Alexander documented nearly every major household responsibility for 9 years. She handed documents to the clerk, school records, medical logs, financial transfers, calendar archives, mortgage payments. The clerk distributed copies forward. Judge Whitaker reviewed several pages silently, then looked up. These records indicate Mr. Alexander was the primary emergency contact for all 3 children. Yes, Your Honor. Consistently. Yes. Randall stood again. Primary emergency contact does not equal primary provider. Maggie nodded slightly. Correct, which is why we also provided payment records. Another binder opened. Corey watched Vanessa for the first time since entering the courtroom. She remained composed externally, but he noticed the tiny changes now. Tighter jaw, stillness in her shoulders, recognition. Because the evidence was no longer abstract, it was organized, precise, difficult to dismiss. Judge Whitaker flipped through several highlighted pages. Mr. Alexander covered orthodontic expenses, medical deductibles, mortgage arrears. Maggie answered calmly. Yes, Your Honor. Randall leaned forward immediately. Occasional household support does not negate the broader economic structure. Occasional. The word almost sounded insulting considering the scale. Maggie stayed patient. Then perhaps we should discuss scale. She handed another document forward. Judge Whitaker studied it carefully. What is this? An career opportunity documentation. Randall's expression shifted slightly for the first time. Maggie continued. In 2015, Mr. Alexander declined a federal infrastructure modernization contract through Summit Ridge Infrastructure Group. Judge Whitaker looked down again. Compensation estimate exceeds $4 million. The courtroom changed, not dramatically, quietly, like oxygen pressure shifting inside a sealed room. Vanessa looked toward Corey instantly. First direct eye contact all morning. Corey held her gaze calmly. No anger, no triumph, just truth finally entering the room. Randall recovered quickly. Your Honor, speculative future earnings are irrelevant? Not speculative, Maggie said immediately. Verified. She handed another packet forward. Summit Ridge Executive Confirmation included. Judge Whitaker read silently for nearly 20 seconds, long enough that nobody else moved. Finally, she looked up. Mr. Alexander declined this position due to family obligations. Yes, Your Honor. Maggie's voice remained level. Specifically child care and household stabilization needs during petitioner's career transition into North Star Community Alliance leadership. Judge Whitaker turned toward Vanessa now. Mrs. Whitmore, Alexander, were you aware of this sacrifice? Vanessa hesitated. A dangerous mistake. Yes, she said carefully, but it was his personal choice. Corey felt something settle internally at the phrasing. Not pain. Confirmation. Judge Whitaker folded her hands. Marriage often involves personal choices. Silence followed. Then the judge asked the question that changed the room entirely. Mrs. Whitmore Alexander earlier filings described Mr. Alexander as having contributed minimally to the family structure. Is that still your testimony today? Vanessa straightened slightly. Yes, Your Honor. Maggie looked down briefly at her notes, then back toward the judge. Your Honor, for clarity, could the court ask petitioner to define contribution? Randall frowned immediately. Judge Whitaker allowed it. Mrs. Whitmore, Alexander Vanessa answered carefully now. Financial provision, career advancement, stability, leadership. Corey almost looked away at the word stability, because for years stability had been his entire life. Maggie walked slowly toward the evidence table. Interesting definition. She opened another binder. This exhibit contained school attendance records, showing Mr. Alexander attended 93% of all educational meetings. Another page, medical documentation lists him as primary treatment coordinator for Sophie Whitmore's chronic asthma care. Another, transportation logs show he handled nearly all childcare movement scheduling for 9 consecutive years. Another, bank records confirm he personally prevented foreclosure on the marital residence through liquidation of private investments. Judge Whitaker's expression hardened slightly. Randall interrupted again. Domestic support alone is not what we're discussing anymore. Maggie cut in calmly. She placed the final document onto the evidence table. Corey recognized it immediately. The original Summit Ridge confirmation letter, $4 million. Judge Whitaker reviewed the pages silently. Then she looked directly toward Vanessa. Mrs. Whitmore, Alexander, your filing stated Mr. Alexander never contributed anything meaningful. Vanessa shifted in her seat. Yes, Your Honor. The judge removed her glasses slowly. That statement appears increasingly difficult to reconcile with the evidence before this court. For the first time all morning, Vanessa looked uncertain, not emotionally exposed, not dramatic, just unprepared, because public narratives function differently than documented timelines. Corey sat quietly beside Maggie while rain streaked across courthouse windows behind them. 9 years of invisible labor had finally entered official record, and the truth sounded heavier out loud than he expected. Maggie opened another binder carefully. Black cover, fresh tabs. She looked toward the judge. Your Honor, she said calmly, we have one additional category of evidence relevant to credibility. Randall immediately stood. Objection. Judge Whitaker raised a hand. Sit down, Mr. Pierce. Maggie rested her hand lightly on the binder. North Star, internal representations. Vanessa's face changed instantly. Small shift. But Corey saw it. And in that moment, he understood something important. She had expected to fight emotions. She had not expected to fight records. The courtroom felt different after Maggie Keller said the words North Star internal representations. Not louder, not more crowded, just tighter, like the air itself had become structured around something irreversible. Judge Eleanor Whitaker leaned forward slightly. Counsel, clarify. Maggie opened the black binder without hesitation. This section pertains to public-facing claims made by North Star Community Alliance during grant applications, donor communications, and executive summaries. Vanessa shifted in her seat. Not visibly dramatic, but Corey noticed a micro-adjustment in posture, the kind people make when they realize a room is no longer predictable. Maggie placed the first document on the record, a North Star federal grant application. Highlighted sections marked in yellow. She read calmly. Petitioner describes her household stability as supported by a full-time caregiving partner, allowing her to maintain executive leadership capacity. She paused, then added, "The named partner is Mr. Corey Alexander." The courtroom went still. Judge Whitaker looked down, then again, slowly. Randall Pierce leaned forward. "Your Honor, those statements are marketing language used for philanthropic appeal." Maggie didn't react. She turned a page. "This is not isolated. Another document, and this, another, and this as well." Corey watched the stack grow on the clerk's desk. Each page represented a version of his life he had never been publicly acknowledged for, but privately depended on. Maggie continued, "Across multiple North Star submissions spanning 4 years, petitioner consistently identifies Mr. Alexander as primary household stabilizer, caregiver, and logistical support system." She looked up. Yet in this courtroom filing, she describes him as contributing minimally. Silence expanded again, this time heavier. Judge Whitaker adjusted her glasses slowly. "Mrs. Whitmore Alexander," she said, "do you contest the authenticity of these documents?" Vanessa hesitated. That hesitation mattered. "No, Your Honor," she said finally. "Those documents were prepared for funding purposes. They reflect organizational framing." Randall quickly added strategic positioning for donor engagement as standard practice in nonprofit leadership. Maggie nodded slightly. "Then we are in agreement that Mr. Alexander's role was acknowledged as essential when funding depended on it." Randall didn't answer immediately. That pause was enough. Judge Whitaker looked down at the documents again, then back at Vanessa. "Explain the discrepancy." Vanessa straightened. Her voice remained controlled, but something underneath it was thinner now. "Mr. Alexander was home." "Yes." "He supported the household, but I carried the financial burden." Corey felt the words land differently this time, not because they were new, because they were now surrounded by evidence that refused to let them stand alone. Maggie stepped forward again. "Your Honor, we are not disputing petitioner's income contribution. We are establishing that her characterization of respondent as minimally contributing is factually inconsistent." She placed another document forward. "This is a financial ledger of household expenditures." Judge Whitaker scanned it. Mortgage transfers, medical bills, orthodontic payments, emergency housing stabilization funds, transportation costs, educational deposits. Maggie continued, "All funded or co-funded by Mr. Alexander's accounts during the marriage." Randall stood again, more sharply this time. "Your Honor, this attempts to reframe marital cooperation as unilateral ownership." Judge Whitaker didn't look at him immediately. "Sit down." Randall paused, then obeyed. Corey noticed that. Control in a courtroom wasn't about volume. It was about whose voice was allowed to stop the room. Judge Whitaker leaned back slightly. "Mr. Alexander," she said finally. Corey stood. Not dramatically, just precisely. "Yes, Your Honor." "Did you maintain primary responsibility for child care logistics during the marriage?" Corey answered honestly. "Yes." "Did you decline professional advancement opportunities to fulfill those responsibilities?" "Yes." "Did you contribute financially to household stability?" "Yes." The judge nodded once, then turned toward Vanessa. Mrs. Whitmore Alexander, you stated earlier that Mr. Alexander contributed minimally. Vanessa inhaled slowly. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Whitaker paused. Not for effect, for alignment. With respect to the record before this court, that statement appears inconsistent. The words weren't harsh, but they were final in tone. Randall tried again. Your Honor. Even if Mr. Alexander provided domestic assistance, the primary financial structure of the household, Maggie interrupted calmly, was sustained through joint and alternating contributions, including direct financial intervention from Mr. Alexander that prevented foreclosure debt escalation and educational interruption. She turned to another section. Additionally, the court should consider opportunity cost valuation. Randall frowned. Corey watched Vanessa carefully now. For the first time, she was not responding quickly, not controlling the rhythm, not guiding perception. She was listening, and that was new. Maggie continued. Economic analysis conducted by Dr. Helen Mercer estimates Mr. Alexander's unpaid domestic labor at over $1.2 million in replacement value across 9 years. A murmur moved through the courtroom, not loud, but present. Judge Whitaker raised her hand slightly. The room quieted again. Maggie added the final piece, and excludes the verified $4 million federal contract declined by Mr. Alexander due to family caregiving obligations. Silence returned, this time deeper, like the room itself was recalibrating. Judge Whitaker looked directly at Corey. Mr. Alexander is that figure. Accurate. Corey nodded. Yes, Your Honor. No embellishment. No emotion. Just fact. Vanessa looked down briefly, then back up. Her expression was still composed, but something inside it had begun to shift. Not collapse, but recognition. Randall spoke more cautiously now. Your Honor? The petitioner's position is not that respondent contributed nothing in a literal sense. It is that the petitioner carried disproportionate financial responsibility while also maintaining public-facing leadership roles. Maggie responded immediately, which is contradicted by petitioner's own filings in North Star grant documentation. She placed another page down where she explicitly attributes her leadership capacity to spousal caregiving support. Judge Whitaker read silently again, longer this time. Then she leaned back slightly and spoke carefully. Mrs. Whitmore Alexander, this court is observing two conflicting narratives. Vanessa's voice was quieter now. I was describing different contexts. Judge Whitaker nodded slowly. That is clear. Then added, but consistency of representation matters when legal determinations are being made regarding financial distribution and contribution. Corey remained still. He had stopped expecting emotional resolution long before this moment. What he was watching now was something else, systems correcting themselves under pressure. Judge Whitaker looked at both attorneys. I will take this under advisement. However, preliminary assessment suggests Mr. Alexander's role in both financial and domestic contribution has been significantly underrepresented in the initial filing. Randall opened his mouth, then closed it again. Maggie said nothing. She didn't need to. Judge Whitaker continued. The court will not accept simplified narratives that ignore documented financial and caregiving contributions. She paused, then added, especially when those contributions directly enabled one party's professional advancement. That sentence landed cleanly. Vanessa finally looked toward Corey again, this time longer, not angry, not defensive, just recalculating. Corey did not react, because there was nothing left to perform. Judge Whitaker closed the file slightly. We will recess for review before issuing temporary determinations. She tapped the gavel once, not loudly, but decisively. Court adjourned for session break. The room slowly shifted into movement, clerks gathering files, attorneys speaking in lowered tones. Vanessa stood first. She hesitated before leaving the table, then walked toward the exit without looking back. Randall followed immediately. Corey remained seated for a moment longer. Maggie leaned closer. "You okay?" Corey considered the question, then answered honestly. "I think so. Not victory, not relief. Something quieter. Alignment between truth and record. That was all." As they left the courtroom, Emma was waiting outside the hallway bench. She stood when she saw Corey. Her eyes searched his face immediately. "What happened?" she asked. Corey looked at her for a moment, then said simply, "They read everything." Emma nodded slowly. "Good." Caleb appeared a few steps behind her, hands in his pockets. "You win?" Corey shook his head slightly. "I don't think that's how this works." Caleb frowned. "Then what is it?" Corey looked back toward the closed courtroom doors. "Now it matches reality." Emma studied him for a long moment. Then quietly, "That's enough, isn't it?" Corey didn't answer immediately, because for the first time in a long time he realized something important. Sometimes justice wasn't loud. Sometimes it was just documentation finally being believed. The days after the hearing did not feel like victory. They felt like exposure. Not of Corey Alexander, but of the system that had surrounded him for nearly a decade without ever fully seeing him. Vanessa Whitmore Alexander did not call, not directly. All communication shifted through attorneys. Randall Pierce submitted revised statements within 48 hours, carefully adjusting language, removing absolute claims, and reframing earlier declarations as interpretive summaries. Maggie Keller called it what it was, damage control. Corey stayed in the background of it all, still waking up at 6 a.m., still making breakfast, still driving Sophie to school, still answering Caleb's short questions in the kitchen like nothing outside had changed. But something, because now when Corey looked at the house, he no longer saw only a home. He saw a record of transactions no one had previously acknowledged. One Thursday evening, Maggie arrived at Willow Creek Drive with a stack of updated filings. She did not sit immediately. Instead, she looked around the kitchen as if recalibrating her understanding of the case. "She's shifting strategy," Maggie said. Corey leaned against the counter. "How she's no longer arguing you contributed nothing." A pause. "That argument didn't survive court." Corey nodded once. "So what now?" Maggie placed the documents on the table. "Now she's arguing contribution imbalance and emotional misalignment." Corey frowned slightly. "That sounds softer." "It is," Maggie said, "and that's intentional." She opened the file. Courts respond differently to perception-based arguments when factual disputes have already been weakened. Corey listened carefully. Maggie continued. "She's also requesting primary residence adjustment for the children." That changed the room temperature immediately. Corey didn't react outwardly, but something inside him tightened. "On what basis?" he asked. Maggie flipped a page. Professional travel stability. External visibility. Claimed emotional development environment concerns. Corey looked down briefly. Emotional development environment. Translation: the house Corey had built, maintained, and stabilized for years was now being reinterpreted as insufficient. Not because of collapse, but because of narrative restructuring. "And the children?" Corey asked. Maggie hesitated slightly. "They've been asked to provide statements." That landed harder. Caleb's face came to mind first, then Emma, then Sophie. "Are they required?" Corey asked. "Not exactly, but the court may consider input depending on the judge's discretion." Corey nodded slowly. "I don't want them in the middle of this." Maggie looked at him directly. "They're already in it. The question is whether they speak blindly or with context." That night, Corey sat alone in the basement office after everyone had gone to bed. The room felt different now, not because anything physically had changed, but because everything inside it had meaning attached. Each binder represented testimony. Each folder represented verification. Each file represented a version of time that could now be cross-examined. Corey opened the Summit Ridge envelope again. Still there, still precise, still real. $4 million. A life not taken. A future redirected into school pickup lines and hospital waiting rooms. He closed it slowly. Not regret, just awareness. Upstairs, footsteps moved lightly. Emma appeared at the basement door. She didn't knock. She rarely did now. "You're still working?" she asked. Corey shook his head slightly. "Just organizing." Emma stepped inside and looked at the table. "You always say that." Corey almost smiled. "It is organizing." Emma crossed her arms. "Maggie told me they want statements." Corey looked up immediately. "She shouldn't have told you that first." I asked. A pause. Then Emma added quietly, "I said I would do it." Corey straightened slightly. "You don't have to. I know." Her voice was steady, not emotional, not confused, just certain. "I'm not doing it for Mom or against her," Emma said. "I'm doing it because I remember things correctly." Corey watched her carefully, like what Emma hesitated only briefly. Then, like who was actually there? Silence filled the basement. Corey felt something shift in him again. Not legal, not strategic, human. Emma looked at the folders on the table. "You think she doesn't know what you did?" she said softly. Corey didn't answer immediately, because that was no longer the question. The question was whether knowing had ever mattered more than acknowledging. "I don't think it's that simple," Corey finally said. Emma nodded slightly. "It never is." She turned to leave, then paused. Without looking back, she added, "You don't need to prove you mattered to us." The words stayed in the room long after she left. Corey sat alone for a long time after that. The next morning, Vanessa requested a mediated settlement conference. Neutral location, private setting, no formal courtroom. Maggie explained it carefully over the phone. She wants resolution before further exposure of financial overlap with Northstar. Corey understood immediately. This was no longer just a divorce. It was reputational containment. The conference took place at a law office downtown with glass walls and neutral furniture designed to remove emotional context. Vanessa arrived first. Professional attire, composed posture. But Corey noticed something subtle now, less certainty, more calculation. Randall sat beside her. Maggie sat beside Corey. The mediator introduced himself briefly, then began. "Both parties are here to reach an equitable agreement regarding asset distribution and custody considerations." Vanessa spoke first. Measured, controlled. "I want stability for the children. I don't want conflict. I believe we can resolve this respectfully." Corey listened, not reacting. Randall followed immediately with structured proposals: property division, financial allocation, visitation schedules, everything framed carefully. Then Maggie spoke. "We will not accept any narrative that misrepresents primary caregiving structure or financial contribution imbalance." The mediator nodded slowly, then turned to Corey. "Mr. Alexander, do you wish to respond?" Corey considered the room, the glass walls, the filtered silence, Vanessa watching him carefully now. He spoke simply. "I don't want to fight for recognition." That surprised even Maggie slightly. Corey continued. "I want accuracy." A pause, nothing more. Vanessa's expression shifted slightly at that. Not anger, not relief. Something closer to discomfort, because accuracy was harder to negotiate than emotion. The mediator adjusted his notes. "Then let's focus on verifiable structure." Hours passed. Arguments refined, numbers compared, schedules analyzed. Children's routines dissected into calendars and reports. At one point, the mediator asked about emotional stability, Emma's college transition, Caleb's behavioral history, Sophie's medical needs. Corey answered each question without exaggeration. Vanessa did too, but differently. She spoke in frameworks. Corey spoke in events. That distinction became increasingly visible. By late afternoon, the mediator paused. "I need clarity," he said. "Both parties acknowledge Mr. Alexander provided substantial caregiving support." Randall started to interrupt. The mediator raised a hand, and both parties acknowledged Mrs. Whitmore. "Alexander provided primary financial income." Maggie nodded once. "Yes." The mediator leaned back. "Then the dispute is not contribution." Silence. It's interpretation. That sentence hung in the air longer than anything else. Corey looked toward Vanessa for the first time during the conference. She was already looking at him, not hostile, not warm, just exhausted. For a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them, not reconciliation, not resolution. Recognition that the same years had been experienced differently, depending on what each person had been required to carry. The mediator closed his folder. "We will reconvene with proposed settlement adjustments." The session ended without conclusion. Outside, Denver sunlight reflected off glass buildings as Corey stepped onto the sidewalk. Emma was waiting by the car. Caleb leaned against the doorframe. Sophie held Corey's hand immediately when she saw him. No questions, no analysis, just presence. Vanessa emerged a few seconds later. She stopped briefly before getting into her car. Her eyes met Corey's one last time. Then she said something quietly. Not for court, not for attorneys, just for the space between them. "You didn't have to disappear like that." Corey looked at her calmly. "I didn't disappear." A pause. "I stayed." Vanessa didn't respond. Then she got into her car and left. Corey stood there for a moment longer. The wind moved through downtown Denver gently, not violent, just steady. Emma looked up at him. "What now?" she asked. Corey looked toward the street where traffic moved in organized silence, then toward the 3 children beside him. "Now," he said quietly, "we finish this properly." And for the first time since the filing began, that didn't sound like conflict. It sounded like closure being built from structure instead of emotion. The final hearing did not arrive with drama. It arrived with procedure. Denver District Courtroom 4B looked exactly the same as it had weeks earlier. Fluorescent lights polished wood, the faint smell of old papers and filtered air. But the atmosphere inside it had changed completely. Not tense, not chaotic, structured. Corey Alexander noticed that immediately. Cases like this stopped feeling like emotional disputes once enough evidence entered the record. They became something else. Architecture. Vanessa Whitmore Alexander arrived first again, but this time she was alone. Randall Pierce followed a few minutes later, carrying a slimmer file than before. Maggie Keller placed her materials on the table with the calm precision of someone who no longer needed to convince anyone, only clarify what had already been proven. Judge Eleanor Whitaker entered at exactly 9 o'clock. She sat down, reviewed the file in front of her, and looked up. "Counselors, we are here for final temporary determinations, pending settlement or trial resolution." Her gaze moved briefly across the room. "Based on the record already established, I will be focusing today on structure of custody, financial equity, and documented contributions." Vanessa shifted slightly in her seat. Corey remained still. Maggie stood first. "Your Honor, before determinations are made, we request the court formally acknowledge updated valuation summaries regarding caregiving and financial contributions submitted by both parties." Randall nodded once. No objection. That alone signaled how far the case had shifted. Judge Whitaker gestured. "Proceed." Maggie opened a clean binder. This summary incorporates court-verified financial records, third-party economic analysis, and verified employment opportunity loss documentation. She placed it forward. Corey did not look at Vanessa, not because he avoided her, but because he no longer needed confirmation from her expression. The record already spoke louder. Maggie continued. Mr. Alexander's contributions include full-time caregiving responsibility for 3 minors, over a 9-year period primary educational and medical coordination, and direct financial intervention, preventing mortgage default and debt escalation. She paused slightly. And verified declination of a $4 million federal infrastructure contract due to caregiving obligations. Judge Whitaker flipped through the pages slowly. No interruption, no commentary, just review. Then she looked up. Mrs. Whitmore Alexander, she said calmly, "Do you dispute any of these facts?" Vanessa hesitated. This time, not long, just enough. "No, Your Honor," she said. Corey noticed that shift immediately, not denial anymore, position adjustment. Judge Whitaker nodded once. Then the court recognizes substantial non-financial contribution from respondent. Randall shifted in his chair, but did not speak. Maggie continued, "Regarding financial structure, we acknowledge petitioner as primary income provider. However, evidence demonstrates respondent's direct financial contributions, totaling over 9 years of mortgage stabilization, medical coverage, educational funding, and household expense support." She turned another page, which contradicts prior filings characterizing respondent as minimally contributing. Judge Whitaker looked directly at Randall. Counsel Randall cleared his throat. "Your Honor, we maintain that interpretation of contribution remains discretionary within marital context." The judge responded without raising her voice. Discretion is not the same as contradiction of documented fact. Silence followed. Corey felt something settle inside him, not satisfaction but final alignment. Facts were no longer competing narratives. They were becoming structure. Judge Whitaker leaned forward slightly. Regarding custody considerations, Vanessa straightened. The room tightened again. This court recognizes both parties as emotionally invested caregivers, the judge said. However, caregiving stability has been primarily provided through respondents' consistent presence and logistical oversight. Vanessa looked down briefly. Not broken, but recalibrating. Judge Whitaker continued, "Temporary custody arrangement will reflect shared parental rights, with primary residential stability remaining with Mr. Alexander pending final resolution. A small shift in the room, not loud, but final in implication." Randall looked toward Vanessa, then back at the judge. No immediate objection followed. That silence mattered more than words. Judge Whitaker moved to financial determinations regarding marital property. She reviewed the documents again. The court finds that both parties contributed to asset accumulation through distinct but significant roles. She paused. However, misrepresentation of contribution in initial filings requires correction in equitable distribution assessment. Vanessa inhaled slowly. Corey watched only the judge, not the reaction, not the emotional echo, just the structure. Judge Whitaker continued, "Primary residence shall remain jointly held pending final division determination with no unilateral claims permitted at this stage." Randall nodded reluctantly. Maggie did not move because she knew the most important part had already been established. The narrative had been dismantled, not emotionally, legally. Judge Whitaker closed the folder slightly. Before concluding, she said the court will address one final matter. She looked directly at Vanessa. Public representation versus documented contribution. Vanessa looked up, for the first time that day fully alert. The judge continued. The record shows inconsistency between public-facing statements and legal filings regarding respondents' role in household stability and support. A pause. This court does not adjudicate public perception. However, credibility is relevant when evaluating financial claims. Vanessa's expression tightened slightly. Not anger, containment. Judge Whitaker concluded. The court advises all parties that future filings must accurately reflect established record rather than interpretive framing. She tapped the file once. Is that understood? Randall responded quickly. Yes, Your Honor. Vanessa followed a moment later. Yes. Corey said nothing, because there was nothing left to confirm. The judge signed the interim order. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck once, not dramatic, final. The room shifted immediately into movement. Clerks gathered papers, attorneys closed files. Vanessa remained seated for a moment longer than necessary. Corey stood quietly. Maggie leaned toward him. It's done for now, she said softly. Corey nodded. Not everything, she added. I know. They walked out together. The courthouse hallway felt different now, less heavy. Not because the case had ended, but because uncertainty had reduced. Emma was waiting near the exit bench again. Caleb stood beside her. Sophie sat between them, swinging her feet. When Corey approached, Sophie stood immediately. Did we win? She asked. Corey paused, then answered carefully. We're okay. Emma studied his face. Caleb asked directly. So? What happens now? Corey looked at them. Not as defendants in a case, not as variables in a legal equation, but as what had actually mattered all along. We go home, he said. Emma nodded slowly. Caleb exhaled like he had been holding his breath for months. Sophie smiled. Vanessa exited the courthouse a few minutes later. She stopped a short distance away. For the first time, there was no performance, no audience voice, just a woman who had spent years building a narrative and now had to exist beside a different one. Her eyes met Corey's. No hostility, no apology either. Just recognition that something had ended without either of them fully choosing how it ended. I didn't expect it to go like this, she said quietly. Corey responded evenly. Neither did I. A pause. Then Vanessa looked toward the children. I'm still their mother. Corey nodded. Yes? That was never in question. Another silence. Then Vanessa added softer, You really stayed, didn't you? Corey didn't answer immediately, because that word stayed had carried different meanings for years. Then he said simply, I didn't leave. Vanessa absorbed that without response. Then she nodded once. I need time to understand this, she said. Corey replied honestly. So do I. She turned and walked toward her car. No dramatic exit, just distance forming naturally again. Emma watched her leave, then looked up at Corey. You okay? She asked. Corey looked at his daughter for a long moment, then at Caleb, then at Sophie holding his hand. Yes, he said. And for the first time, it wasn't a legal answer. It was real. They walked toward the parking lot together under cold Denver sunlight. No applause, no celebration. Just a family moving forward after a long period of being misread. And behind them, the courthouse doors closed quietly, not ending the story, just ending the part where silence had been mistaken for absence. The house on Willow Creek Drive felt different after the court order, not empty, not restored, recalibrated. Corey Alexander noticed it first in the mornings. The silence no longer carried pressure, it carried structure. Emma moved through the kitchen earlier, now preparing her own coffee before school without waiting for anyone else to set the rhythm of the day. Caleb left his gym bag by the door instead of hiding it in frustration. Sophie still talked too much before breakfast, but her laughter no longer felt like it was trying to fill a space that didn't exist. Vanessa had moved into a temporary apartment across town. No dramatic departure. No final confrontation, just logistical separation implemented through legal order. The first week after the ruling, Corey kept expecting emotional fallout, arguments that never came, phone calls that never arrived. Instead, everything settled into something quieter, distance with boundaries. One Saturday morning, Maggie Keller stopped by unannounced. She stood at the doorway for a moment, observing the house like someone verifying a system that had finally stabilized. It's quieter, she said. Corey nodded. It's supposed to be. Maggie stepped inside. You've adjusted well. Corey closed the door behind her. I didn't adjust, he said. I just stopped fighting two versions of reality at the same time. Maggie gave a small approving nod. That's healthier than most outcomes I see. They sat at the kitchen table where so much of the conflict had once unfolded. Now it just looked like a kitchen again, not an archive, not a battlefield, just a place where breakfast was made. Maggie placed a thin folder on the table. Final asset clarification, she said. Nothing dramatic, just closure paperwork. Corey glanced at it, then back at her. That's it for now. He opened it briefly. Property division adjustments, confirmed shared residence terms, financial equalization finalized based on documented contributions, legal language replacing emotional chaos. Corey closed it again. Feels small, he said. Maggie looked at him carefully. That's what resolution looks like, when it's done correctly. Silence settled between them. Then Maggie added something softer. You didn't lose yourself in this. Corey almost smiled. I came close. She stood to leave. At the door she paused. For what it's worth, she said, most people in your position try to win. You just tried to document reality. Corey nodded once. I didn't know I was doing either. After she left, the house returned to its morning rhythm. Sophie came downstairs holding a drawing. It's you? She said proudly. Corey looked at it. Stick figure. Kitchen. Sunlight. A very large coffee cup. He smiled slightly. That looks accurate. Emma passed by on her way out. I got into the state program, she said casually. Corey looked up immediately. You did? She nodded. Yeah. Then after a pause, I told them everything was stable now. Corey understood what she meant without needing clarification. Stability had become a fact rather than a hope. Caleb appeared in the hallway adjusting his jacket. Coach wants me to start training early season, he said. Corey nodded. That's good. Caleb hesitated briefly, then added, you coming to the first game. Corey didn't hesitate. Yes? Caleb nodded once, cool, and walked out. Sophie climbed onto the chair beside Corey. Do we have to do court anymore? She asked. Corey shook his head. No. She looked relieved. Good. It was boring. That made him laugh quietly. Later that evening, Corey stood alone in the backyard as the sun dropped behind the Denver horizon. The same yard he had rebuilt piece by piece over years. No one fully saw while they were happening. The deck he installed himself. The garden Sophie now claimed as her reading forest. The fence he repaired after Caleb accidentally backed into it with a bike. Everything still there, but no longer carrying invisible weight. Emma's voice called from inside. Dinner's ready. Corey turned back toward the house. Warm light spilled through the kitchen windows. Not perfect, not dramatic, just present. At the table, conversation flowed differently now. Less tension, more awareness. Not everything healed, but everything was acknowledged. After dinner, Caleb lingered at the sink. You ever think about that contract again? He asked suddenly. Corey paused. The question wasn't hostile, just curious. Sometimes, Corey admitted. Caleb leaned against the counter. $4 million. Corey nodded. Yeah? Caleb studied him. Do you regret it? Corey thought carefully, then answered honestly. No. Caleb raised an eyebrow slightly. Even after everything, Corey looked toward the living room, where Sophie was building something out of blankets and Emma was reviewing college forms. I didn't give up a job, Corey said quietly. I made a decision about where I was needed. Caleb didn't respond immediately, then nodded once. Yeah, he said, I get that. And for the first time, it didn't sound like skepticism, it sounded like understanding. Later that night, after the house went quiet, Corey returned to the basement office. The same room that had once felt like a war room of evidence. Now it looked different, cleaner, finished. He opened the storage box labeled evidence, then paused. For a long time, he simply looked at it. All the years, all the records, all the proof that had once been necessary to survive being misrepresented. Finally, he closed the box gently, not because it no longer mattered, but because it no longer defined the present. He placed it on the top shelf, not hidden, not displayed, just stored, where history belongs when it no longer controls the present. Upstairs, footsteps moved softly, life continuing without needing constant justification. Corey turned off the basement light and stood in the dark for a moment, not because he was lost, but because for the first time in a long time, there was nothing left to chase or defend, only forward. The next morning he woke before sunrise as always, coffee brewing, house quiet, but different now, balanced. He stood by the kitchen window, watching light slowly return to Willow Creek Drive. Emma would leave for her program soon, Caleb would train, Sophie would argue about pancakes again, and somewhere across town, Vanessa would rebuild her own version of life. Separate paths, same history. Corey took a sip of coffee and exhaled slowly. He had once thought survival meant staying silent. Now he understood something simpler. Survival was not silence. It was truth that finally had somewhere to stand. And for Corey Alexander, that was enough. Some people measure a life in what they achieve loudly: promotions, recognition, public success. But there are other lives built in silence, in routines no one sees, in sacrifices that never make it into speeches or resumes, in mornings that start before anyone else wakes up, and nights that end after everyone else is safe. Corey Alexander's story was never about losing himself. It was about being misread while holding everything together long enough for the truth to eventually become visible. And sometimes, the most powerful thing a person can do is not argue for their value, but document it until the world can no longer ignore it. In real life, many people live inside that same silence, caring, supporting, building stability that others take for granted. The question is not whether their contribution exists. The question is whether it will ever be seen clearly enough to be understood. Have you ever felt unseen in the role you carried for others? Share your story in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories about quiet strength, hidden sacrifice, and truth finally coming to light, subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow's story will be about someone who was underestimated for even longer before everything finally shifted.